Now, even if, for the sake of argument, we were able to completely prove objectively that faith in God were false, I still believe that we would stand to benefit, to gain value out of these three areas, these three factors that go into religious practice and make it truly valuable. So let's dive in and let's explore why religion is so valuable today. Now, many people today write off religion as something antiquated, impractical, or perhaps even the embodiment of extreme superstition. But I believe fully that we actually stand more to gain from religious practice than we do by simply discarding it and writing it off. Now, in today's video, we're going to be exploring these three areas that I mentioned earlier in the intro. These are self-doubt, self-knowledge, and self-actualization. Now, I use each of these terms a little bit creatively, but as we explore each one, you'll have a very full understanding of what I mean. So without any further ado, let's dive in. Let's begin with the first element, that of self-doubt. Now, if you've heard this term before, you've probably heard it in the context of self-esteem, in which case self-doubt is almost always something negative that needs to be gotten rid of. But the way I use doubt, I want to use it in a more Latinic sense, going back to the original Latin dubitare, which means not only to doubt, but also it has an implied meaning of to question or to hesitate. And this questioning, this hesitation, is something that I think we can stand to benefit from in our modern society. In the world we live in, it's so easy to live almost like a god. I mean, with a relatively low level of wealth, we can buy whatever we want, go wherever we want, and do whatever we want. And it often takes something like a global pandemic to make us realize that we're not completely in control of the world. We're not completely able to make reality bend to our own will. And I think this recognition, although it's frustrating, it's also true. And so for that sense, it's grounding. So what does this grounding have to do with the idea of self-doubt, and what can that look like for us? Well, let me give the example of someone who does the bare minimum in terms of religious practice. All right, let's say that you're someone who goes to church on Sunday for 1 hour. But other than that, you do nothing during the week. You don't pray, you never think about God. It's only literally your thoughts of the divine are limited to that 1 hour at church on Sunday. Well, if you are spending that 1 hour in church on Sunday, that's 1 hour more than most, to be honest, that you're spending contemplating the divine, that you're contemplating the nature of the universe, that you're contemplating the God of creation, and you're contemplating your role in that creation. And as you're contemplating these things, as you're questioning, hesitating, it does give you pause for you to consider your own life, your own role in the world, and your own character. And this leads us into the next element of self-knowledge. To introduce the concept of self-knowledge, I want to first begin with everyone's favorite topic, the concept of sin. Now, for all intents and purposes, our modern society operates as if sin doesn't exist. It's really just all preference. But far from being the supposed shame-based and judgment-inducing concept that it is, I actually think that sin is something that we stand to benefit a lot from. I'm about to tell you why. The thing is, etymologically, sin is just the concept of missing the mark. And so by allowing ourselves to actually embrace the idea of sin, to allow us to embrace the idea of missing the mark, it reveals to us that we are flawed individuals. And this, as much as our egos don't like to hear it, is actually something very beneficial. The thing is, when we come to the realization that we are flawed individuals, that we are lacking at times, there's one of two things that we can do. We can either pretend that that's not true and that it doesn't exist, which is almost kind of what modern society does, which is just says, oh, no, there's nothing really wrong with anything. It's all just preference-based, whatever. Or we can actually look at ourselves and say, what can we do to make this better? And that is what, for example, in Christianity, what that preaches, really the cycle is recognition of sin, repentance, forgiveness, and growth. And it is that growth that is so beneficial, and why religion offers us, again, this idea of sin that leads to self-knowledge and ultimately to growth, or as we'll say for this last element, self-actualization. Before we discuss self-actualization, we first need to discuss Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Because for those of you who are familiar with this hierarchy, you know that self-actualization is at the very top of the pyramid. But first, what are the other tiers? Well, at the bottom we have physiological, this is basically clothing, food, and safety, okay, at the very primal level. On top of that, we have safety needs, security needs. So this is kind of like law and order, but it can also be looked at in terms of job security. Now, on top of that, we have love and belonging needs. These are relationships, community, family, friends, all of that. Then above, we have self-esteem, basically self-worth, your idea of yourself. And on top, self-actualization, the fulfillment of your full potential. Now the thing is, religion actually offers to fulfill the 5 needs in Maslow's hierarchy. For us in this video, we're only going to be focusing on the final 3, but I do think it's worth mentioning that when it comes to the first 2, so safety and security basically, religion actually for many in poorer countries does fulfill this need. So I can think off the top of my head, you have various different Christian charities that go out and give food to the needy or to the homeless. You also have different places like safety shelters for women who are abused or caught up in sex trafficking, for them to flee to and find a safe shelter. For us too, though, religion offers to fulfill the needs in the higher levels of Maslow's hierarchy. So let's take, for example, the level number 3, love and belonging. Well, this is essentially community. And you can find this in, for example, a church community or Christian community on a larger international scale. And the reason this is important is because in our society today, people are so mobile, people come and go, and they are a bit ethereal in a sense. But when you have a group of any sort, whether that's a running group or a specifically religious community that meets on a weekly basis, that you get to know them, that's something very powerful, and it creates a sense of belonging. Now the next level in Maslow's hierarchy is that of self-esteem. And what we find here is something quite simple, which is that if you believe in God and you believe that you are a child of God, well, knowing that the God of the universe loves you, that, in my opinion, does a lot for your self-worth, for your sense of self-esteem. So that's another area in which religion serves to help us. Now, the last level is self-actualization. When it comes to self-actualization, there are 3 elements that go into that. The first is recognition and acceptance. This is an understanding of reality, of knowing your actual role in the world. And again, this is something that I believe sin offers us. It allows us a realistic understanding of life and ourself. The second is what's called problem centering. And it's basically being able to focus on problems of others, of being able to solve problems that benefit others, not simply focus on ourselves. So we go from being inward focused to outward focused. And then the last, of course, is meaning. And religion offers us meaning on a deep level because it invites us into a story that is far greater and grander than anything we could create ourselves. And we get to play a role and partake in that story. Now, to wrap things up, I want to do a little bit of a thought experiment. And so think basically of what we just discussed, people living into the ideas of self-doubt, hesitating and questioning your role in the universe, self-knowledge, becoming aware of who you are, and self-actualization, living to your full potential. Imagine that not just happening on a personal level, you or me, but happening on a societal level, happening to thousands of people. Would the world not be a better place? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for any sort of theocracy or even believing that the entire society is going to change to become religious overnight. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm just trying to point out is that if 10% more of the population lived into these things, into self-doubt, self-knowledge, and self-actualization, the world would be a much better place. So let's face it, in a society that's so full of delusion, depression, and despair, we need to be wary of how quick we are to write off the importance and the value of religion. Let's face it, we need religion far more than we know.